Before I begin today, I wanted to speak about Tevilat Kelim. But before I speak about immersion of utensils in a mikveh, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature that you wish to pursue.
I just would like to announce that I'll have to be leaving in the middle, and I don't want to be rude or offend you, but I will have to go. So that's
I,
just the announcement.
I have very tough skin, and I shall not be offended.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm so happy. Very good.
feel free to skedaddle when it's appropriate.
Thank you so much.
Quite welcome.
Well,
Okay.
I do have a question.
Shmuel, yes, Shmuel, what's the question?
So I'll start with the first part is the term Yetzer Hara a halachic term at all?
What's term?
Yetzer Hara.
Yetzer hara. Yetzer hara. Is there a halachic element to Yetzer hara? I cannot think of any halachic aspect. I cannot think of any halachic dimension to the Yetzer hara. I can point out that the view, the understanding of the human soul as engaged in a conflict, tension between the Yetzer Hatov and the Yetzer Hara is an old way. It's been around for a long time, and I'm sure you've heard the terms very frequently. But these terms, Yetzer Hatov and Yetzer Hara, as two elements of the human personality, which are battling with each other. These ideas are rooted in Kabbalistic, Hasidic understanding of the nature of the soul. If one steps outside of the Kabbalistic, Hasidic tradition, in the Rambam, for example, you will I want to say you will not find any Yetzer Hatov or Yetzer Hara, but it's not precisely true. The Rambam does use the words Yetzer Hara here and there, but not in the sense of an internal battle between good and evil. When the Rambam uses the term, I'll give you an example. The Rambam says at the end of Hilchot Gittin. Oh, you don't know about this, but you can learn all about it in Shakespeare. Sometimes marriages are unhappy. Sometimes husband and wife do not get along well with each other. I know it's very difficult to imagine such a situation, but trust me, Shakespeare testifies to such marriages. Husband and wife separate. He gives her a get, and they're free to remarry, well, more or less, whoever they want. Well, what happens if he doesn't want to give her the piece of paper on which the divorce document is written? After all, according to the Torah, it's him giving her the piece of paper on which the divorce document is written, the get that dissolves the marriage. Well, what if he says, no, I refuse to go through with the procedure? Well, if so, she is in trouble. She's technically married to him, therefore prohibited from marrying anyone else, and that puts her in a very difficult situation. Well, the question now arises, why is he refusing to give her the divorce? Well, maybe the facts of the case justify him. Maybe it's all her fault and not his fault. Maybe the facts of the case are on her side and against him. Well, the Bet Din the rabbinic court is going to have to decide whether or not he should give a get in this case, or maybe he shouldn't, whatever the facts of the case are. But if the Bet Din decides that he should give the get and he refuses to do so, then he is in violation of the order of the court, and that makes him Rasha, a wicked person. Well, the solution to this problem, according to the Rambam, is for the Bet Din to have a number of thugs take the recalcitrant husband into the back room and beat him up until he says, Rotze ani, I want to give the get. And and now she'll be divorced. Isn't that lovely? But the question arises, the conceptual question arises, in order for a divorce to be valid, it's not enough that someone grabs his hand and forces him to give the divorce document to life. He has to do so of his own free will. Further, she must accept it of her own free will. If one side doesn't want to go through with the divorce, it's not going to work. You need agreement between them. Well, in a case like this, where he doesn't want to give the get, and the only reason he says, Rotze ani, I want to do it, is because the thugs are beating him up. What kind of ratzon? What kind of ani rotze is that? I mean, everyone understands that he really doesn't want to do it. He just said it to stop the thugs. The Rambam says what happened here is that the beating up, the violence performed on the body of the recalcitrant husband has beaten down, subjugated the Yetzer Hara, leaving only the Yetzer Hatov, active, vibrant, and energetic. And when he says the words, Rotze ani, that's the Yetzer Hatov speaking. That's the true Jewish neshama. That's the true Jewish soul which wants to do what's right, and the Bet Din has paskened that is what is right, that he should divorce his wife. So of course, when he says Rotze ani, that's the Yetzer Hatov speaking. That's the Jewish neshama speaking, and therefore that's called ratzon. That's called will. So the Rambam does mention the idea, but never in the context of understanding the way the soul works. Tov, in any event, the simple answer to your question is Yetzer Hara is not a halachic concept.
What did he mean when you beat the Yetzer Hara and then you leave only the Yetzer Hatov?
Well,
Do you mean like inclination physically? I don't know.
the Rambam believed that the neshama, the soul, always strives for contact with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The soul always strives for spirituality, and therefore there's part of a person who always wants to be spiritual. Against that, there's also chumriyot. There's also the people also want to live in the gashmiut in this world, but since the neshama is spiritual in nature and therefore wants to do the right thing, namely the mitzvot, and in this case the Bet Din decided that it's a mitzvah for him to divorce the wife. Well, that's okay. No, you don't know about this, but out there in the world, the general population, they become very namby-pamby nowadays, and they don't believe in employing thugs in the back room of the Bet Din. This is not done anymore. Oh, Chaval al Avdin. But in the state of Israel, where the rabbinic court is an arm of the Israeli government. In the state of Israel, the Bet Din has the authority to put the recalcitrant husband in jail, which is what they actually do. The problem is that for some people, being in jail is a step up in life. You know, like at least now he has 3 square meals a day and a roof over his head, and some people prefer that to the way they were living previously. So although in general incarceration is a strong motivation to do what the Bet Din wants you to do, so you'll be freed from jail, there are a number of cases of people who would prefer to be in jail rather than free because their lives are better there. It's a step up in life. Okay, is that enough about the sad topic of divorces? Okay, any other questions before we turn to Tevilat Kelim, immersion of utensils in a mikveh? Okay, let's begin. Min HaTorah, metal utensils, which are intended to come in contact with the food when the food is ready to eat, require immersion in the mikveh before use. We're talking here about a utensil that was previously owned by a non-Jew. Now it's owned by a Jewish person, and it's made of metal. It's intended to come in contact with the food. When the food is ready to eat, a fork, a knife, a spoon, metal, and therefore, before the Jewish person uses it with the food, it requires immersion in the mikveh. Midrabanan, glass utensils also require immersion. There's a similarity between glass and metal. Both get soft when you heat them up, and therefore, just as metal utensils can be repaired by heating and fixing them, similarly, glass utensils can be repaired by heating and fixing. So, because of the similarity, Chazal made a rabbinic legislation that glass utensils also require immersion in the mikveh. Now, there are two conceptual problems here. Conceptual problem number one is, what is metal? That would seem to be a simple enough question. Chemists today have a clear definition of what they call metal, and certain elements in the periodic table, which are lined up in vertical columns on the periodic table, are called metals by chemists. They're called metals because they have certain properties, namely on a microscopic level, the molecules line up in a crystal lattice. They have very specific crystal lattice structure on the microscopic level. I'll call upon it what chemists call metals. It's not particularly relevant as far as the din deraisa is concerned. We have to figure out what the Torah defined as metals. And the Gaon of Vilna, and following him, the Igrot Moshe and many other poskim, reason as follows. In the Torah, there are only certain metals mentioned. The metals which are mentioned in the Torah are gold, silver, nechoshet. They didn't have pure copper back in those days. When they said nechoshet, they meant what we call bronze, because they had no way of purifying the copper. Oferet, lead, and tin. Those are the 5 metals mentioned in the Torah. And therefore, the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, and the Igrot Moshe, and others reason as follows. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew when the Torah was created. Torah existed even before the creation of the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that there were other metals embedded in the earth, aluminum, for example, magnesium. So why then does the Torah say that these are the metals which are mikabel tum'ah, which are subject to the rules of ritual impurity and therefore require a mikveh to purify them. Well, the conclusion is, since the Torah lists these 5 metals as the metals which are subject to the laws of ritual impurity and require a mikveh to purify them, it's these 5 metals and only these 5 metals which require immersion in the mikveh, and others don't. Now, let's think about that idea for a moment. If we accept this idea of the Gra, the Gaon Mivilna, and the Igros Moshe, this is a minority view, incidentally, but if we accept this minority view, then aluminum utensils are immune to ritual impurity and therefore no need to immerse them in the mikveh. One could say the same of stainless steel. Even though stainless steel is mostly iron, it has a lot of chromium in it. It has a lot of carbon. It's a lot of other stuff in stainless steel. There are many recipes for stainless steel. They all have chromium. They all have carbon. They all have other stuff in them. But like there's so many different versions of stainless steel out there. We can't even make a list of all. But in any event, the Torah speaks nowhere about stainless steel. Maybe that also is exempt. And indeed, most of our kitchen utensils today are made out of materials other than the 5 metals listed in the Torah. Some people are still using cast iron pans, cast iron pots. Those are barzel. Those are iron. But aside from cast iron pans and cast iron pots, which really are barzel, none, very few of the materials used in modern kitchens are metals according to the Gra and the Igros Moshe, and therefore require no immersion in the mikveh. Now, if we think about it for a moment, we understand the importance of this idea on the conceptual level. We look forward to the building of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash. When the 3rd Beis HaMikdash is built, of course, the Kohanim are going to live their lives b'tahara, in ritual purity, so that they will be able to engage in the hakrava, the korbanot, in the Beis HaMikdash. And back in those days, maintaining a kitchen which was ritually tahor was fairly simple and straightforward. Archaeology, and whenever archaeologists dig up a house from the Second Temple period, and next to the house or even in the house, they find a mikveh. So the archaeologists say, that must have been the house of a Kohen, because he needed the mikveh frequently to purify things. Back in those days, when kitchen utensils were few in number and made out of stone, wood, other materials other than metal and glass, a few things required immersion in the mikveh. And the few things which did, a pot, a pan, a few things like this, a knife, were easy enough to immerse in the mikveh when necessary. And the Kohanim needed those mikvehs fairly frequently. Just think about it. In a household where a number of the women in the household are of childbearing age, they become nida approximately once a month. And while they are nida, anything they touch becomes ritually impure. Well, you just dunk it in the mikveh. It's a fairly simple story. Nowadays, what are you supposed to do with your microwave oven? Nowadays, what are you supposed to do with your electric mixer? Nowadays, what are you supposed to do with so many kitchen utensils which simply cannot be immersed in a mikveh without ruining them? That nowadays it's going to be highly impractical for a Kohen, when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, to live his life in a way that the kitchen remains ritually tahor, unless, of course, the Kohen is very careful to buy these utensils made not out of barzel. I don't imagine it's going to be gold and silver anyway, but at least not barzel, made out of aluminum, magnesium, plastic, materials, which anyway cannot become ritually impure. Now, if we embrace this approach of the Gaon Vilna and the Igros Moshe, it follows that most of the utensils in kitchens today, your ordinary pots and pans, your ordinary knives and forks, are made out of stainless steel, which is a new material, didn't exist back in the days of Torah, and therefore might very well be exempt from the laws of ritual impurity, and no need to immerse them in a mikveh. Now, as I emphasized a number of times, all this is the minority view. The majority view, that large majority, holds that anything which has the characteristics of a metal, you heat it up and it melts. Anything which has the characteristics of a metal is halachically speaking a metal, and therefore, according to the majority view, all of our ordinary knives, forks, pots and pans, and so forth do require immersion in the mikveh. So someone like me, who's very, very, very frum. I mean, it's just so few people out there can meet my standards of piety. Well, of course, the majority view demands that my cutlery be immersed in the mikveh before I use it. But according to the Gaon Vilna and the Igros Moshe, it's probably exempt from the mikveh because it's stainless steel, which is mentioned nowhere in the Torah, and therefore I will immerse it, but I will not run the risk of using God's name in vain in reciting the bracha. I will omit the bracha. That's what I would do. That's one big conceptual problem. What exactly is a metal? And since that's controversial, in most cases, I will omit the bracha unless I'm immersing uh, uh, cast iron, which is just iron, which is exactly what they had back in the days of Torah. That's my personal strict view on the matter. The ordinary practice, most people are making the bracha because the vast majority of poskim require immersion in the mikveh for anything which is an ordinary metal, even if it's not one of the five mentioned in the Torah. Now the second big conceptual problem here is in order to require a mikveh, the utensil must previously have been owned by a non-Jew, and now when it comes into Jewish ownership, if it's metal or glass, it requires immersion in the mikveh, metal or glass intended to come in contact with the food when the food is ready to eat. This raises the conceptual question of who exactly is a goy. The problem is as follows. In Western Nambe Pambe legal systems, they have invented this idea called corporations. That's a big thing. And since the 17th century, corporations are dominating the world. What is a corporation? A corporation is, in the eyes of the law, American law, British law, French law, Chinese law, throughout the modern world, a corporation, in the eyes of the law, is a person, not a biological person, but just like a biological person, you or me can own property, sell property, just like a biological person, like you or me, can commit a crime and end up in court and punished, or damage, injure someone and end up in court for damages. Similarly, a corporation, which is not a biological person, but a legally constructed person, can also own property sell property, sue in court, be sued in court. Of course, in court, the corporation is going to have to be represented by humans who represent the corporation, but they're not the corporation. The corporation is a juristic person, not a biological person. Now, what does halacha have to say about corporations? Well, this is not surprisingly a controversial issue. Most poskim hold that in halacha there is no such thing as a corporation. And since in halacha there's no such thing as a corporation, really it's the stockholders who are the owners of the factory where the utensils are made in China. And since the owners of the corporation are Chinese, not Jewish, therefore this is called non-Jewish ownership. On the other hand, some poskim say that from the halachic point of view, these utensils were manufactured by a Chinese corporation, which is not a person at all, not a biological person, and surely not a goy, and therefore, anything manufactured by a corporation was not previously owned by a goy, and when it comes into Jewish ownership, is exempt from tefillin. Someone as frum as I am, someone as strict as I am, will of course immerse the Chinese utensils in the mikveh before using them, because the vast majority of poskim hold that's what's required min ha-Torah. But once again, I will refrain from reciting the bracha so as not to run the risk of using God's name in vain in an unnecessary bracha. If I bought the utensil in a non-Jewish store in Paris, London, New York, or Melbourne, and the owner of the store is not Jewish, well, now I know that it was previously owned by a non-Jew, and that would justify reciting the bracha. Okay, all of this is background. Now, let's turn to the specific issues, and I doubt that we're going to be able to get through all of this today, so we're going to have to continue next week as well. I want to begin speaking about the disposable utensils. I know that they're not good for the environment, and I know that it's preferable not to use them. But the truth is, there are people out there who are using the disposable utensils. Use them once, throw them away. What's the halacha regarding this? We begin with the Minchas Yitzchak, Dayan Weiss, who headed the Haredit, the Me'asharim. He begins by quoting an earlier sefer, the Gidulei Tahara. Le'inyan yorot shemivashlim bo yash. And he's talking about the vat in which brandy is distilled. A distillery making, whether it's brandy or whiskey, whatever it is, the whiskey or the brandy, the scotch, the bourbon, whatever it is, whiskey with an E in it or without an E in it, is distilled, and the beginning of the distillation process is to boil the sour mash in a huge metal vat. Well, Mikilim, nishtamesh bahem bli tefillin. These vats, when the Jews are distilling spirits, when the Jews are making whiskey, and the Jews were very much involved in the whiskey business in Eastern Europe, when the Jews are making whiskey, the huge vats used to boil the sour mash were not toveled, not immersed in mikvahs. You needed a huge mikvah, but they didn't bother immersing them in the mikvah. If you don't have a big enough mikveh, you could schlep the vat to the seaside and immerse it in the sea. But they didn't bother. Why not? Lefisha omrim ha'omanim she'im mashim hayash v'kelim elu hu mitkalkel. Because the distillers, who are the experts in distillation, say that you're not allowed to leave the sour mash in the vats for a long time. You have to boil it, distill it all pretty quickly, because if the sour mash remains in the vat for a long time, it's going to get ruined. Imkain lo have kli tashmish. It follows, therefore, they reasoned, that the vat is not called a kli tashmish, is not called a utensil intended for long-term use, holding the sour mash, which is being distilled. Af al gav de kaimelan dafilu tashmish amrai asur below tvila, even though the halacha is that you're not even allowed to use a utensil requiring tevila, you're not allowed to use it even once, even briefly, without tevila. Well, that has to do with a utensil which can be used in an ongoing way. A utensil which can be used in an ongoing way, you want to use it only once briefly, it still requires immersion in the mikveh. But these vats cannot be used in an ongoing long-term way because you have to take the sour mash out of the vat pretty quickly so that it does not spoil. Of course, we must admit that these are metal utensils, and the vats are made out of metal, typically copper, and therefore it's possible for them to become ritually impure. Nonetheless, the minhag amongst Torah observant distillers is not to immerse the vats in a mikveh, and the Sefer, this Gidulei Tahar it is quoting, comes to explain why they are refraining from the immersion. The distillers are relying on this idea that you cannot store the sour mash in the copper vats for a long time. Well, that's vats used in the distillation procedure. Kol shekain b'nidan didan. All the more so in disposable aluminum baking trays or anything like this. Not only is the food will not be stored long term in these disposable utensils. Not only that, but these utensils can only be used once. And since the utensils can only be used once, well, they are, by definition, not long-term use utensils. And according to the Gidulei Karka, as quoted by the Minchas Yitzchak, only a utensil which is suitable for long-term use requires immersion in the mikveh. And therefore, an aluminum tray, which is used only once to bake in and then thrown out, has two reasons for leniency. Number one, such utensils are never used for long-term storage. And number two, well, can only use it once and not a second time. Masha Enken Bedina and Gidulei Karka, the Gidulei Karka vats, those vats which are used over and over again and which could be used for long-term storage, he found a reason for leniency there. All the more so should we be lenient in the disposable utensils which we have nowadays. Bottom line, ein sarich tvila af lechatchila. Bottom line, these utensils require no immersion, and even lechatchila, there's no reason to do that at all. B'kol shekain in cry nahog kain, all the more so because that's the minhag to refrain from immersing them. V'chein amadvar, that's the practice of the people, not to immerse them in the mikveh, according to the Eda Haredis and Meir Sharam. Therefore, it's perfectly acceptable to give a hechsher to a bakery which is baking their products in single-use disposable aluminum trays, market that to the people. People take out the cake, eat the cake, throw the aluminum form away afterwards. There was no obligation of tevila. One can give one seal of approval to the bakery because they're guilty of nothing. They had no obligation to immerse those aluminum trays before using them. That's the lenient opinion. Let me point out in passing that we generally view, at least most people generally view the Eda Haredis and Meir Sharim as being the strictest of the Hechsherim. And that's not precisely true. There are a significant number of big kulot, great leniencies built in to the Eda Haredis, leniencies which they've been following for generations and are reluctant to abandon, and are still here. We have one before us. They exempt single-use utensils from immersion in the mikveh. I'll give you another example, and you'll understand how it works. What about a kosher restaurant or a kosher caterer here in Yerushalayim with the hechsher under the supervision of the Eda Haredis? Do they have to immerse their utensils before using them at a catered event? Pots, pans, cutlery, and so forth and so on, everything made of metal or glass. According to Eda Haredis, they are exempt. The reason they are exempt is as follows. It says in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch that kli schora, utensils used for marketing food, are exempt. For example, you buy a glass jar of anything, pickles, olives, jam. You buy a glass jar of food. Well, the store which is selling you the food in the glass jar or metal container, that's kli schora. The utensil is not being used to eat. The utensil is being used to market the food. And indeed, all the poskim agree that the utensils which are being used to market the food are exempt from tevila. Therefore, if you buy a bottle of wine in a glass bottle, in Israel today, almost all the glass bottles are imported from Europe and were made by non-Jews. There is one glass company, the Phoenix Glass Company here in Israel, which does make bottles, and you occasionally see wine bottles manufactured here in Israel. Yes, with that symbol on it. You've got Shmuel is showing us what the symbol looks like imprinted on the bottle. But the winery is not obligated. No one holds that the winery is obligated to immerse the wine bottles in a mikveh because they're only using the bottles to market wine. You buy the bottle of wine, the glass jar with whatever's in it, the metal can with whatever's in it. You consume the product, drink the wine, eat all the olives, and now you want to reuse the utensil. You want to reuse the wine bottle to hold water on your dining room table. You want to reuse the glass jar to hold food that you've prepared yourself. Now, these utensils are no longer kli schora. They're no longer intended for marketing. Now they're intended for use in your home, and now they require immersion in the mikveh. Well, the Edech Haredis reasons as follows. A restaurant or a caterer is in the business of marketing food. That's what their business is. And they supply the food to the customers on dishes, plates. They supply the customers with water to drink in glasses. Well, if we're talking about a caterer or a restaurant, their utensils are kli schora, are utensils for marketing. And the Edech Haredis, unlike other poskim, hold that these utensils are exempt from tevila. Give you one more example. In the Shemitah year, the Edech Haredis embraces a minority view, according to which in the Shemitah year, produce of the land, which is grown by non-Jews, any produce which comes from a non-Jewish farm in Eretz Yisrael, since it's owned by non-Jews, according to the Edech Haredis, the rules of Shemitah do not apply to that food, and therefore that food can be marketed under the hechsher with the supervision of the Edech Haredis in an ordinary shop, in an ordinary greengrocer, in an ordinary supermarket, can become ingredients in ordinary foods with the supervision of the Edech Haredis. Outside of Yerushalayim, this is by no means the majority. This is a minority view outside of Yerushalayim. Outside of Yerushalayim, they of course hold that the rules of Shemitah apply. Exactly the same situation applies with Trumot and Maserot. According to Edech Haredis, this produce is exempt from Trumot and Maserot. Outside of Yerushalayim, the majority view is that it's you have to take Trumot. Bottom line, the Edech Haredis has a number of baked-in leniencies, which are part of their hechsher. This is one of them that we've just seen today. Let's go one step further. The Chelkas Yaakov, Rav Yaakov Breish, the last of the Hasidic poskim in Europe after the Holocaust. All the others were either murdered by the Nazis or ended up in places outside of Europe. He ended up in Switzerland after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, and he was the last of the Hasidic poskim in Europe. Regarding utensils which get thrown into the rubbish after using them, something they never had in Eastern Europe, but in Switzerland they had such things after the Holocaust, disposable utensils which are used only once. Nirlani Adati, it seems, in my humble opinion, de einam tzrichim tevila. They do not require immersion. Kevan de tashmish karot alalu hurakarai, because these utensils are used only temporarily, not in an ongoing way. Nizrakim teichef tashmishim, they get thrown in the rubbish immediately after use. Einan mekablim tuma, and therefore they do not. Therefore they are not subject to the rules of ritual impurity, as the Rambam says, chotel shal chutzin shemanichim bo rotev kayotzei bazeh hu notel mitocho v'noten lotocho mittameh. According to the Rambam, if you use the peel of a fruit as a container to hold something, the peel of the fruit, think of an avocado peel, is not subject to the laws of ritual impurity because it's not suitable for ongoing use. You might use the shell of an avocado once, maybe twice, but surely not in an ongoing way. You're going to have to throw it away. It's not an ongoing use, therefore exempt from the rules of ritual impurity. Bottom line, our second posek, Hasidic in this case, agrees that kelim, utensils which are used only once and then thrown away, exempt. This is the majority view, and this is the common practice, not to require immersion of glass utensils. They tell a story. I, I have neighbors who are Hasidei Chabad, and they, of course, like to tell stories about their rebbes, like other Hasidim, like to tell stories about their rebbes. And one told me the following story. Once, the Rebbe Rashab, two previous, was on a train uh, from Eastern Europe to Vienna. The person who told me the story neglected to mention why he was on the train, where he was going in Vienna. And I asked the person telling the story, why was he on the train going to Vienna? What was his business in Vienna? And the Chassid telling me the story did not know the answer to that question, but historians know. Historians know that he went to Vienna for psychiatric treatment by Sigmund Freud. In any event, he was thirsty. He was thirsty, and at one of the train stops, he bought a glass of water at the station, at the train station. Took it into the train, pronounced a bracha, Borei Pri Hagafen, drank the water, and tossed the glass out the window. Well, that's the story the Chassid tells, and now we understand the exact reasoning here. He wanted that glass not to be a utensil of ongoing use, because if so, he would not be allowed to drink the water without first immersing the utensil in a mikveh. But since he knew full well that he was going to toss it out the window, and it's not for ongoing use. Similarly, if after you drink your glass of vodka, you throw the glass into the fireplace and smash it, that is a utensil which is not intended for long-term use and exempt from tevila. Okay, now we come to the minority view. The minority view is that of Rav Moshe Feinstein, the Igros Moshe. Ruba de alma ein mishtamshim bekelim halalu ela pam achat, kevan she'ein demehim yikarim. Most people use these utensils only once because they're so cheap. That's why they bought them. Cheap, so they could use them once and throw them away. Some people are very careful with these disposable utensils. Some people, after having used the disposable baking tray, will then wash it carefully and use it a second time. Wash it carefully, and you can use it quite a number of times until it gets holes in it, and then you have to throw it away. Iron the Rambam. Rambam says, any utensil which can hold liquids or solids in it is it subject to the laws of ritual impurity. That's if the utensil can last a long time. If the kli has the potential to last a long time, it's subject to the laws of ritual impurity, even if you want to use it only once. Ketzad, these are still the words of the Rambam. Ha'osa kli min ha'or, if you make a utensil out of leather, leather which has not been properly tanned. Once leather is tanned, it'll last a long time. But if you take leather which has not been tanned, raw rawhide, minania, make a utensil out of paper, a paper cup. Af al pi she'ena niya mekabel tuma, or meklipot yirakot, or if you use a utensil, the shell of a nut, the shell, the peel of a pomegranate as a utensil, these things can receive tuma. These things are subject to the laws of ritual impurity because they can be used many times if you are very careful with them. The Rambam implies if it's according to the Rambam, if it's possible to use the utensils many times, it's called an ongoing usable utensil and requires immersion in the mikveh. The fact that you are going to use it only once and you are going to then dispose of it in the rubbish is only because you are wealthy. It's only your wealth that leads you to use it only one time. But there's nothing inherent in the utensil that demands that it be thrown into the rubbish. That's just your choice because you're so rich. And therefore, these utensils require immersion in the mikveh. You buy a disposable baking pan or any disposable utensil made out of metal, typically aluminum, requires immersion in the mikveh before use. That's the minority view, and that's the position of the Igros Moshe. Let me point out that on the conceptual level, this tshuva of the Igros Moshe has very, very powerful ramifications. This tshuva is part of a series of tshuvot in which the Igros Moshe over and over again argues that we must, in halachic matters, in Torah matters, we must ignore the affluence of contemporary society. Right, Igros Moshe came from this little shtetl in Russia where everyone was dirt poor. The people lived in destitute, the Jews, everyone there lived in destitute poverty under the Soviets, came to New York and he saw the great affluence of American society. And he said to himself, who says that this affluence is permanent? Who says that this affluence is going to continue forever? The grandchildren, great-grandchildren of these Jews who are living in such affluence in New York might be poor, just like we were in Eastern Europe. And just because the people happen at the moment to be wealthy, that should not influence our decisions in halachic decision. That was one of the methodological principles underlying the thinking of the Igros Moshe. So in any event, those are the opinions those are the opinions regarding disposable utensils. Next week, what I want to talk about are electrical utensils, mixers, microwaves, and what to do about immersing electric kettles or any electrical utensil. That'll be for next week. At this point, let me ask you if you have any questions that you want to ask.
It seems like we would treat a coconut shell kind of like we would with a plastic fork or aluminum.
Correct, because it's won't be used many times.
But I didn't actually fully, I mean, I have to look back at the source, understand why the Igros Moshe brought in the Rambam's strict opinion that if it can hold liquid, it can be makabel tuma.
Yeah, well, of course, the Rambam is talking not about food utensils necessarily. He's talking about any utensil, which might be in the Kohen's house, and anything, even an arrow. Are you an archer?
I have.
Okay, so think of an arrow. An arrow is just a simple stick of wood. right? Pshutei kliates, simple sticks of wood, are not subject to the rules of ritual impurity. But as soon as you carve a notch at one end of the arrow, intended to receive the string, when you you've made a kli kibul, you've made something which is intended to hold something else, namely the string. When you're going to shoot the arrow, an arrow with a notch on the back is subject to the laws of ritual impurity. Okay, so the Rambam is talking about things like this having nothing to do with food.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Yes, Nava.
So if I have a tendency to not throw certain things out and keep them for a long time, that should be toggled, right? Because I happen to have coconut shell bowls that I've been using over and over again.
Kamoch kamoni. Indeed, except you are not concerned with having a household with a Kohen in it that's going to engage in the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. If so, those coconut shells would require immersion in the mikveh. Since you're only concerned about utensils used for food, your coconut shells are not metal and not glass, and therefore exempt. Similarly, wooden bowls, salad bowls made out of wood, are indeed subject to the laws of ritual impurity, and Kohanim would have to be very concerned about that when the temple, when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. But for serving food, no, it's wood, it's neither metal nor glass, no need at all to immerse it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're really talking about the nettle, the tins that people reuse. So if you're using plasticware that's sturdy,
No problem.
doesn't.
No problem, no problem. And the same archaeologists who like to say, oh, there's a mikveh in the house, it truly belongs to a Kohen. The same archaeologists, when they dig up all stone utensils in the kitchen, they say, oh, surely a Kohen, because stone utensils are not mikabel tuma, are not subject to the laws of ritual impurity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wow. Excuse my ignorance. How does iron fit with gold, silver, bronze, lead, and tin?
I said tin at the end. The fifth, no, the fifth is barzel. I said it incorrectly. The fifth is barzel, iron.
Oh,
They did not have tin in those days. They had iron.
oh, maybe I confused it. Okay, good.
Iron is smelted from. It was smelted in Eretz Yisrael in biblical days. That's why it's called the Iron Age. Okay, that's it for today. Then I wish you a good week and a safe week.
Can I
Good
ask you a question?
Sure.
Sorry, Rav. Unrelated.
All Jews are related to each other.
Sorry?
All Jews are related to each other. Even the converts are B'nai Avram Nasara.
What about our questions?
They're all related.
So my question.
In the second Nedarim, there's such a thing as a neder, making a vow, and there's also a yad l'neder. Yad l'neder is if you do not recite the whole text of a vow, just you recite part of the text of a vow, and that obligates you as though you had recited the whole text. The image of the Gemara is like the yad, the handle of a pitcher, a water pitcher. You pick up the water pitcher with the handle, you've got the whole pitcher. You pick up a pot by the handle, you've got the whole pot. Similarly, the Gemara says, if you recite part of the text of the neder, you've grasped the whole neder and it becomes obligatory. That's what the Gemara says. The Hasidim point out that this is the structure of Torah as well. If you grasp onto any part of Torah, you're grasping the whole.
Lovely. So the question is, when you
make a donation to tzedakah online, and there is a fee which you can choose to pay or not to pay. Sometimes it's compulsory. Sometimes you can choose to pay or not to pay. Is that fee considered part of your tzedakah?
If you're obligated to pay the fee, no, it's not part of your tzedakah. If it's optional and you choose to pay it, it can be taken from your tzedakah budget.
Even
Can you
if the
say that
fee
again?
Yeah.
You have a specific example that we can discuss?
No, I was just wondering if was that my actual question? I think that was my actual question.
The,
But I was
the rule is anything that you're obligated to pay should not come from your tzedakah budget. Anything which is optional and you choose to pay, if it's a mitzvah purpose, then can be taken from tzedakah.
so even if it's so even if it's like just an organization, just the website that just takes a transaction fee,
Mhm.
if you opt in to cover the transaction fee, then it's included, and if it's compulsory, it's not included.
Yes and no, yes and no, yes and no. For example, you want to make a donation to some Jewish institution, and you do it through their website, and they have a fee which they charge for every donation, a processing fee. If you make the decision that you want to use your tzedakah budget to cover the required fee, if you make that decision before you become obligated to pay, before you click on the button, and now you're obligated to pay, as long as you make the decision you want to use your tzedakah budget before you become obligated, then it's fine. Once you've clicked on the box and are now obligated to pay it, it's too late to make that decision.
Say that again, please.
If you decide before you begin the donation process on the internet site, you're not yet obligated to do anything. And therefore, at this point, you can decide that you will use your tzedakah budget to cover the obligatory fee. On the other hand, once you're working on the internet site and have clicked on the box that you're going to donate, now you're obligated to pay the transaction fee, and it's too late to make the decision that you want to cover it with tzedakah funds. The same
Even if
applies as follows. But let us say you want to donate. You want to donate a sum of money to a Jewish school, and this is a school for adult education, somewhat like our yeshiva right here and now, and you want to make a contribution, and you also want to study there yourself, and there's a fee for that. Well, of course, donations you can always take from your tzedakah budget, but what about the fee for the class that you're taking? Well, if before signing on the dotted line, if before signing up for the class, you decide, I'm going to finance the fee for taking the class from my tzedakah budget, well, you've made that decision before you are obligated to pay. No one said you have to sign up at all. But once you've signed up, now it's too late to make that decision. Tzedakah funds can be used for optional purposes, not for obligatory, and it changes from optional to obligatory at the moment that you obligate yourself.
So if after you've donated, they say, would you like to give extra to cover the admin fee?
Mm-hmm. You can cover that with your tzedakah fee, with your tzedakah budget, definitely.
As long as the option is still open.
Correct.
But if it's an automatic part of the process, then you can't make that option.
Correct. Once you're obligated, too late to decide.
How come once we're
Okay.
obligated, it's too late? Or rather, why obligated?
Mayo simple chov. You cannot use tzedakah budgets to pay your chovot, your debts.
That's clear. Thank you.
Okay. Tov, any other issues for today? Okay.
So thank you so much.
Next week. Until then, shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you for all this clarity.
Bye bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.